Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's show, I wanted to do a quick video on an alleged letter that was sent by Donald Trump to the Norwegian Prime Minister. I haven't seen a copy of this letter. There's just been a few tweets back and forth on Twitter, and it has been covered by the mainstream media like Sky News and the like. So I will include some snippets from their broadcasts regarding this issue. However, from what seems to be available online at the moment, we'll do a little dissection of the letter or the alleged letter, and I'll give you my thoughts on it. I've managed to locate a copy of the purported letter that Donald Trump sent to the Norwegian Prime Minister in the newspaper The Independent here in the UK. So I'm going to read. It's a fairly short thing. I'm just going to read it out to you. And the letter goes, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars, plus I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China, and why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats land there also. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have the complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President DJT." That's basically the entirety of the letter that was sent to the Norwegian Prime Minister by President Donald Trump. After the one line about the Nobel Prize, he then goes on to talk about Denmark being incapable of protecting Greenland, which then has obviously in his mind a knock-on effect that the United States mainland is threatened, hence their national security becomes an issue. What I take from this is that the Europeans continuously say that that Denmark is not being asked alone to protect Greenland, and that it would be a collective effort of all the European countries that are signatories to NATO, including the United States of America. And this is why they continuously say it's like banging their head against a wall. They can't understand Trump's posturing. If he wants mineral rights to drill for rare earths in Greenland, he should submit the permits and he'll most probably get it. And if he wants more bases, they'll approve it and things like that.
And then another line, which I think will have NATO leaders really feeling like they're banging their heads against a brick wall, is this idea that Denmark can't protect Greenland. And I think what I've heard from numerous leaders, whether it's the EU foreign policy chief, the Germans, people around the EU, is that they're not asking Denmark to protect Greenland alone. They're saying this can be done as part of NATO, and the US is obviously a key part. They're not saying you can't play a role in it. They're saying you should be playing a big role in this because you're a key member of NATO. And I think they'll be wondering, well, if you want more bases in Greenland, it's highly likely you can have them. If you're so worried about security, why have US troops been reduced from thousands to a few hundred? If you want to have access to rare earth and other precious minerals on Greenland, you can apply for the permits. So they're saying you don't need to do this alone. It doesn't need to be us versus you.
It brings me back to my previous point in my other video on what's going on in Greenland. I'll put that video up here. Donald Trump is coming from a different place, and the European leaders are coming from a different place. When he says that Denmark is incapable of protecting Greenland, and he also mentions NATO's inability to protect Greenland. Let's look at NATO's track record currently. They're embroiled in a war with the Russians. Together with American assistance, they haven't been able to stem the Russian advance within Ukraine. The gloves are coming off now on the Russian end, and they're starting to make a more concerted effort regarding their advance within Ukraine. So I think it's safe to say that the Russians are on track to achieve their aims and goals as set out at the beginning of their special military operation into Ukraine. And that would mean, effectively, that NATO has failed and they were incapable of stemming a Russian advance. Now, if NATO is incapable of stemming a Russian advance in Ukraine, how on earth are they going to be able to stem a Russian advance or Russian influence coupled with Chinese influence in Greenland and surrounding areas, while simultaneously maintaining and managing a failing war in Ukraine? They don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources, they don't have the arms and ammunition, they don't have the funding to continue in Ukraine alone, let alone then adding a threat that could suddenly emerge in the area surrounding Greenland. Now, there's a term we use in law. It's called meeting of the minds, especially when it deals with the law of contract. And this is a classic example where that term, the meeting of the minds, comes into play. Because when two parties sign a contract, there has to be a consensus, there has to be a meeting of the minds. If there's no meeting of the minds, you will find that at some point when that contract does break down and it has to be adjudicated over, the presiding judge or magistrate has to then look at it from the standpoint of both parties to understand where the breakdown came in, because they should have had that meeting of the minds or consensus. Now, the Europeans continuously harp on the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Trump can have mineral rights, he can have extra bases. However, they are looking at it from a United States that is securely and safely within NATO. Now, that is the fundamental difference in this entire issue. Because if you look at Donald Trump, on the other hand, he's looking at it from a vantage point where the United States is not a part of NATO. Or even worse, NATO has now dissolved. And that is where you do not have the meetings of the mind. Because the Americans are looking at it from one area or from one direction, whilst the Europeans are looking at it from somewhere completely different. They seem to not want to entertain the possibility that NATO could be dissolved, or alternatively that the Americans are no longer a part of NATO. Why they do this, I don't understand, because Donald Trump, as well as members of his administration, have repeatedly threatened to pull the Americans out of NATO. So I think if the Europeans look at this issue from the way the Americans are looking at it, they'll be able to understand it better and then probably reach some conclusion on this matter. Furthermore, Donald Trump has threatened with the 10% tariffs on trade goods imported into the United States from European countries that would oppose his annexation of Greenland. Now, let's just look at one industry, for example, the automotive industry. I believe that German automotive industry bosses have come out urging restraint and dialogue and diplomacy to find a suitable and amicable solution to this Greenland issue. Because the German automotive industry is currently on its knees. It is taking a beating. I think Volkswagen have closed down a plant in Germany, or a few plants.
The Volkswagen is all set to close its Dresden vehicle manufacturing plant this week, and it marks the first time in the carmaker's 88-year-long history that it has shut a production facility in Germany. While the factory itself is relatively small, the decision carries an outsized significance. It offers a window into the mounting pressures facing both Germany's flagship manufacturer and also the country's broader industrial economy. The closure follows a restructuring agreement that was reached in 2024, and that has included large-scale job cuts. And experts say that the move reflects weakening demand in Europe, slowing electric vehicle adoption and intensifying competition from Chinese automakers. It's also a broader sign that Chinese automakers have undercut European rivals on both cost and speed of innovation. For Volkswagen, once the unchallenged symbol of German industrial strength.
The thing here is that it's rumored that the Chinese government are subsidizing their own, that is the Chinese automotive industry, which then allows Chinese companies or automotive companies to flood Europe with cheap motor vehicles, brand new cars that have all the bells and whistles at an extremely affordable price. Now, I remember about a month ago watching a video, a car video, where a gentleman from his own private supercar dealership went into one of the BYD dealerships here in the UK, and he was met by a salesman who used to work for Skoda. And that salesman said that at Skoda they sat around the whole day doing absolutely nothing because they were unable to sell a single vehicle. However, he joined BYD, and they've been asked by the company, the parent company of BYD, to please restrict or hold back on their sales because the company cannot produce vehicles fast enough to meet the European demand.
I've just transferred from Skoda just because this is just taking off.
So you were part of VAG Group, basically?
I was part of the VAG Group, yeah.
And there's talk all the time of like job cuts, especially with manufacturing and struggling with sales. How was the new car sales at Skoda?
It didn't really exist.
Really?
I think I did 4 in 3 months.
Right, and
so you can see clearly where the problem is. Should these extra 10% tariffs be levied on these European countries, and Germany is one of those countries mentioned in Trump's threats, then just one industry, the automotive industry within Germany itself, is going to be hammered. So, once again, I don't know if this letter is legitimate. It's been touted all over the news. I've read out what I could find from the newspaper, The Independent, here in the UK. It's not a copy of an original letter that was sent. It's something that's been transcribed. So once again, I can't verify its validity. However, I don't put anything past Donald Trump. So I'm assuming that this is a valid letter. When you see Trump's comments through the lens of a NATO that is devoid of the US, you then begin to see where Donald Trump's concerns come in. Now, I'm neither for or against Trump's argument regarding Greenland and NATO. It is what it is. I'm just saying that these are the facts at hand. You can argue Trump is manufacturing a crisis to get the US out of NATO. You can argue that it's a ruse to acquire Greenland. Or you can argue it's a legitimate threat. Either way, from Trump's perspective, it's a national security threat to the United States. When you look at the tone of the letter, Trump making reference to the Nobel Peace Prize and that he stopped 8 wars, so basically alleging that he he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, that the Danes landed a boat on Greenland 500 years ago, and that the Americans also had boats go there or ships go there. You know, it's evident that this is somebody with a huge ego that feels the need to have his ego placated in some way. I think maybe the Europeans, before entering into any dialogue with Donald Trump on this matter or any subsequent matters, should first consult with psychologists and psychiatrists on how to deal with Trump. Thank you for joining me in this video on this breaking news about Donald Trump's letter to the Norwegian Prime Minister. I hope you enjoyed it. And please like, share and subscribe to help our channel grow and to help us with the algorithm. Until the next episode, goodbye.